The next section is talking about the manners, the inner dimensions, if you will, spiritual manners, as well as the rewards of Hajj. So Ibn Qudamah rahimahullah, he begins and he says that that there is no way to connect to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala except by freeing yourself up for His service. Freeing yourself up from distractions, right? So when you want to connect to Allah, and this is in general, you have to remove everything from your life. If it's just momentarily. The monks of the past, and even now still today, they isolate themselves. They go into their hermitages. Some of them, what they used to do was go into the mountains in order to be in the company of God Almighty. Right? And so they wouldn't marry, they wouldn't have children, they would be alone, they would be single. They would live a very austere lifestyle in a monastery somewhere or a hermitage in order that they could be focused on serving Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and worshiping Him. So Hajj is the Muslim's monastery. It is our monastic system that at least once in a lifetime, you're going to free yourself up so that you can be totally focused on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, on the service of Allah azza wa jal. Right, so this Hajj is what Imam Qudamah mentions here as being the monastic system of Islam. Right, this is like our monastery for this ummah. From the various different manners of Hajj is that you are not busied. Your mind is not occupied with business, with trade that will distract your heart, that will deviate your focus. So you need to be able to collect yourself, to gather yourself in order to worship Allah azza wa jal, to be in His obedience. You need to be able to be disheveled and dusty in that journey. Right? You need to be able to humble yourself. You need to be in a shabby condition. You know, when you make Hajj, it's dirty business. My experience making Hajj is just that. You put on your ihram, you head into Mecca, you're sleeping on the ground, you're sleeping outside, the accommodation is meager, the facilities are meager and humble, you get sweaty, you get dirty, you become disheveled, and that is exactly what Hajj does. It's intended to humble you. And the objective is to be humble when worshiping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, not too worried about your appearance. You don't want to get overly concerned with, dressing fancy, putting on the best show, wearing the right shoes, matching the outfit, coordinating. No, while you're on Hajj, you're not focused on the worldly exterior, but you're focused on the interior connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So, those are the types of things that you will try and avoid. Also, you should avoid, and here he's bringing a reference to the mahmil, which was, they used to travel on camel, as I said, and you could ride on top of the camel in open air, or they used to have this kind of carriage that they would mount on top of the camel. It looked like a little hut, and typically it would hold two people, one on each side. They would go inside and sit, and it would just kind of travel like that, and it would cover their head. So you should avoid sitting in this. This is not relevant for today. However, just as an academic point, this was considered min mahdurat, the haram, right, to cover the head. And the mahmil was one of the things that they said would be an intentional covering of the head, which should be avoided. The Prophet ﷺ, he made Hajj, and he went on an animal while sitting on a kind of a shabby saddle. He didn't go in the mahmil. He didn't go like with the procession and inside the fancy ride, but he had a basic animal, shabby looking saddle, sat on it, went on his way to Hajj. it was reported that the Prophet ﷺ, he says that Allah Azza wa Jal yubahi bil hajj al malaika. Yubahi bil hajj al malaika. That Allah boasts to the angels about the pilgrim. And he says, look at my servants. They have come to me disheveled and dusty from every place. So witness that I have forgiven them. Right? So humbling yourself in such a manner is a means to the forgiveness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The next thing is the destination that you're going to visit. You should be conscious and aware of the place you are. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has elevated the status of his house, the Kaaba. He has venerated its status, and he has erected the Kaaba as a destination for his servants. He has made around that a haram, a sanctuary, in order to create esteem for it, in order to show its status. There's a haram. It's a sanctuary, much like the king's palace. The land that it rests on is the king's haram. It's a sanctuary for the king. You don't go on the king's land and start cutting from the trees and start hunting the game animals and set up shop and start selling and buying on the king's palace grounds. No. So even more so, you are in the sanctuary of the house of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So it must be recognized as such. And he has made Arafah, the great plain of Arafah, a reminder of your end, a reminder of your ending, meaning that standing like that would remind you of the resurrection. It says everything that you do as a pilgrim should remind you of something and should teach you a lesson. So it doesn't matter what action you're doing, there's a lesson behind it. And he's going to mention a couple of these lessons. When you have to obtain your provisions and your transportation, which is called zad, when you have to go and get your provisions and your transportation, etc., to make the journey, you should be reminded of the provisions that you require for the hereafter of your righteous actions. Right? And the best zad, the best provision is at-taqwa, piety. And piety is righteous action, whether that's action on the limbs or actions of the heart. So you don't want to spoil your actions by showing off or seeking, praise, being recognized. So this is something that you should avoid, trying to show off. This will be of absolute no benefit. It's like bringing fresh food with you only to have it spoil at the beginning of your journey. And then the remainder of your journey, you're thrown into utter chaos and disorder. You packed with you a bunch of fresh food, and then right when you begin the journey, the food spoils. You can't consume it. So now you're traveling on this journey, and you have nothing to eat. You don't know what to do with yourself. It's like doing a righteous action, a righteous deed, for other than the sake of Allah, to show off, or to seek praise, or to increase your status with people. It's spoiled right away. So in your journey into the hereafter, you're thrown into disorder and chaos. So when you leave your residence, when you leave your town or your city, and you get out into the open countryside and you're traveling, and you see the various challenges and the difficulties of that journey, then you should be reminded of your exit from this dunya by way of your death to the various phases of al-qiyamah, which is the resurrection, and what lies ahead of you of nightmare and horror, meaning what lies in the grave and what lies after the judgment. Right? So as you've left your town, the comfort of your own city and your own home, and now you're out in the bar, in the badia, And there's all types of treacheries out there on the road. There's car accidents, there's potential for being taken advantage of, there's etc. You should be reminded with this journey of your journey from this world into the next. You should be reminded at the time of ihram, when you remove your clothes and you're going to put on those sheets. You should be reminded with those sheets of your shroud that you will be buried in. So every moment that you wear those white sheets, you should be reminded of your burial shroud. You should understand that you're going to meet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in clothing that is very different from the clothes that you wear in this world. And it will give you some perspective on what it is that is important in your life. If you begin with the talbiyah is what is said for the Hajj. Labayk Allahumma labayk, labayk la sharika laka labayk, innal hamda wal ni'mata laka wal mulk la sharika lah. That is a statement, if you will. It says, here I am, O Allah, at your service, here I am, to the end of it, that you are saying with that in hopes to have Allah's answer, Allah's response. And you're worried that Allah will not respond to you by giving you permission for Hajj. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَأَذِّن فِي النَّاسِ بِالْحَجِّ. Right, and make your Hajj, or proclaim to the people your Hajj. So by making that talbiyah, you're essentially beseeching Allah that you are at His service, and that you are worshiping Him alone, and that you're going for Hajj, and that you're hopeful that He will respond and allow you to make it. You're worried that He may not answer that and you would be stopped, because people do get stopped on the way. People get stopped before they even leave their home. They get stopped in the airport. They get stopped with their travel agent. They get stopped en route somehow, some way. Many people, they pass away before they even reach the house of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so you're worried that Allah Azza wa Jalla does not grant you the blessing to view and witness and partake in the Hajj. When you get to the Haram, when you reach the lands, the sanctuary, and hope that you will be safe from punishment when you enter into the Haram, because the Haram is a sacred land. There's no fighting, there's no, on that land, you also hope for the security from punishment. And you fear that you will not be from the people that draw near to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You should always, however, throughout your entire journey, you should always give way for hope. Do not want to let the worries of this life and the worries of the hereafter overcome you to where you lose hope in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There's a balance that has to be struck between fear and hope. And when it comes down to it, you should allow hope to win. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He will be more merciful than He is angry. Sabaqat ghadabi rahmati. Right? That Allah's mercy will override or overcome His anger and His wrath. And part of that hope resides in your belief that the generosity of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is vast, and it is for everyone, and that the rights of the visitor will be carried out. You are a visitor to the house of Allah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, if you made it to that house, He's invited you and you're His visitor, and you're hopeful because Allah will certainly not shun a visitor of His, and also will not spoil any of your claim as one who is seeking to reside next to the Kaaba or to be in that space. So when you see the house, when you see the Kaaba, the sanctified house, then in your heart it is filled with veneration and awe, and you thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for allowing you to be of those of such status that they have arrived at the Kaaba, and that you feel an awe, if you will, when making tawaf around it. Because making tawaf around the Kaaba is salah, it's prayer. And that when you touch the black stone, as is the tradition of the Prophet ﷺ, it is as if you are making bay'ah to Allah. When you have a leader and you make bay'ah, when you make a pledge of allegiance, you shake their hand, hand in hand. And so when you go and touch the black stone, you feel as if you are making bay'ah to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You're taking a pledge of allegiance to Allah Azza wa Jal, and that in your heart you are set. Your heart is set on fulfilling that pledge. Right? As people of faith, when we say Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, we've taken a pledge. It's a testimony of faith. And this is a renewal of that, like as if it's a bay'ah there with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And when you are clinging to the Kaaba or grasping onto its sitar, which is the kiswa, that cloth, clinging onto the multazam, which is a location between the black stone and the door, then it is as if you are someone blameworthy, clinging on to the one that they have wronged, clinging on to the clothes of their master, asking for forgiveness, begging for pardon. Right? So it is permissible to, and it's the sunnah to cling your body on with your chest, your face, with your arms, with your hands, with your legs onto the multazam, this particular location between the black stone and the Kaaba, where the door is at. You make your left hand towards the black stone and your right hand towards the door. This was a tradition of the Prophet ﷺ. And also, some of the scholars have said that it is permissible to cling on to the curtains, not seeking barakah of the curtain, but as a sign, kind of an indication that you are clinging on to the forgiveness of Allah. You're clinging on to His forgiveness. When you walk between Safa and Marwa, when you make sa'i between Safa and Marwa, you should be thinking about the two plates of the scale, or as they call the lisan, the two tongues of the scale. As you walk from Safa to Marwa, you should be thinking of your scale in the hereafter as it tilts one way or the other. As for the standing on Arafah, that very honorable plain, when you see everyone there, the crowds, the throngs of people, they're sitting on the mount, they're all over the ground. When you see all of that, raising their voices, various different languages, you should be reminded of Al-Qiyamah. Such a sight should remind you of Qiyamah when the people are resurrected all together. The Ummah is all there in that location, and they are all seeking an intercession. They are all seeking an intercession. They're asking for Allah's pardon. When you go and throw the stones, when you throw the jamarat, you should be intending to surrender yourself to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to surrender yourself in obedience. That the stones, they are not for you. That the action, you may not understand what it's for, but you are simply following a command, surrendering yourself obediently to your master. You are a servant at that moment. And there is nothing to these stones but to follow the commands and obey. And lastly, he says, if you go to Al-Madinah, if you have the opportunity to visit, then you need to remember that that city is a city that Allah chose for His Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And He legislated that it be the place of migration. And it was where the Prophet ﷺ made his home. And then when you're there, you should imagine yourself in his footsteps, the Prophet ﷺ. That is where he walked and where he lived. You should imagine yourself in his footsteps. You should imagine how he was, his manner of awe and humility, his level of tranquility. And then if you want to visit his grave, then your heart should be present, honoring him, venerating him, and respecting him. You should be thinking about, in your mind, his description, his beauty, his completion as a human being, and also aware of his status that is in your heart, and then you say salam to him. You sallim ala an-nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, and you know that he is aware of your presence and that he is aware of your salam, as this has been mentioned in numerous ahadith. And this concludes the chapter, a very short chapter on some of the virtues, manners, and dimensions of the Hajj.